Greetings, I'm Killian Quigley, a postdoctoral research fellow at the Sydney Environment Institute at the University of Sydney. Before we go any further, I'd like to acknowledge and pay respect to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional owners and custodians of the land where the University of Sydney is built and where I'm speaking to you today. The video you're about to watch is one part of a series called Collaboration in Practice, a series of conversations about lived first-hand experiences of interdisciplinary collaboration. Today it's my pleasure to speak with Susan Park and Madeline Taylor, two colleagues whose recent collaborative work together has been inspired by urgent environmental and social crisis. We talk teamwork, hierarchies, complementary knowledge, and a great deal more. Thanks very much for tuning in.
My name is Susan Park. I'm a Professor of Global Governance in the Department of Government and International Relations and a project lead for the Sydney Environment Institute.
Hello, my name is Dr. Madeline Taylor. I'm a lecturer in law at Sydney Law School and an SCI Fellow. My research discipline is energy law and natural resources law, regulation and policy. Thanks
very much both. So one of the several reasons that I've been really excited to chat with you both today is because I understand that EROS is a relatively young collaboration. That is, that you've begun working together fairly recently. Susan, to get us started, could you give us a kind of outline of what it is that you've begun working on together?
So it's been a really exciting, as you said, recent collaboration with Madeline around the Narrabri Gas proposal that was put forward by Santos in and around Narrabri. And one of the interesting things was for me to connect with Madeline, who's an expert in gas and knows this field incredibly well, with my research, which is on the negative and harmful impacts of large extractive projects, particularly oil and gas. So we came together under the umbrella of the Sydney Environment Institute, and we were put in touch with each other through Michelle St. Anne, who's the Deputy Director of SEI. And so it was really always considered to be a short-term project to identify what the specific environmental and social impacts of the project, what they were, and then to create a report that could be presented to the public and presented to the Independent Planning Commission of New South Wales, who was considering the project.
I think for a long time, academics who are interested in the energy or environment space, which of course we both are, have had their fingers on the pulse of a number of projects that are urgent and that will shape the course of our policy, governance and regulatory future in this country. There are a handful of projects which represent and fall into this category, and Narrabri is one. So for a long time I've worked on big projects which I believe, if they go ahead in that planned form that is being proposed by whichever company it is who's the proponent, this will have the ability to change the course of energy policy, energy regulation and governance, to Susan's expertise. And one of those was the Great Australian Bight, for example, the Vickery project, the coal mine project, and Narrabri is a hugely important project. So when we both saw the fact that the IPC was really moving ahead with it this time and the Minister had referred the determination to the IPC, we knew we had to act for that sole reason. This project is the tipping point, and that's why this collaboration was so urgent, so vital, I think, on a number of levels, because we wanted to put our expertise to the fore in a way that policymakers, governments, companies could understand the gravity of the risk we are talking about, not just for the Gunnedah Basin, but for the entire New South Wales electricity and energy grid, essentially, for the future.
I'm totally compelled by the idea that collaborative work sometimes comes out of a sense of responsibility or even obligation. Did you feel similarly about the sort of urgent need to get involved in this work, Susan?
Yes, it was. I was just so thankful that that Michelle introduced me to Madeline because, I work at the global level, so there's urgent issues everywhere. But to be able to make a sort of more local difference was really, really important, considering where Australia sits in sort of broader climate change negotiations, and just trying to make that difference, because the local is the global and you can't disassociate them. So being able to try to contribute in a way that is going to have a larger impact is incredibly important. And I think that's a discussion that the Academy is having more broadly in terms of being able to provide that expertise to be able to shape public discourse.
But could you talk a little bit in practical terms about how you went from perhaps meeting one another, beginning to have those preliminary conversations, to actually beginning to move in tandem, shall we say?
When it came to the actual practicalities of how we got that collaboration going, the first thing was obviously preliminary conversations to make sure that, Susan and I really connected, and that we thought the same sort of ideas in terms of how to transpire a submission to the IPC. And we knew that, obviously, the Narrabri Gas Project, that is a huge multidisciplinary fest of issues, and that this collaboration amongst our other colleagues would mean that we had quite a powerful voice that was attacking this project from a multitude of levels. So it started out with those initial meetings. And then we had quite a number of different collaborative, I would say, discussions about how to move forward. And then from there, we regularly met, exchanged drafts, and bounced ideas off each other to really flesh out this piece and make it really watertight in our arguments, and hopefully something I think that many stakeholders would be interested in reading. And that's the benefit of multidisciplinary collaboration, is that within your one discipline, you might think what you're writing is really clear and concise and interesting. But then when you give it to a wonderful professor like Susan, who was leading this project, coming from such a wealth of expertise around governance, she could really see the bigger picture.
Yeah, thanks, Madeline. I mean, I think that sort of brings us to another really interesting point, which is this thing about how we sort of assert and manage our disciplinary identities within the context of a collaborative relationship. Is collaboration partly a matter of relinquishing some of that identity? Is it about learning sort of when to assert that identity and when to be more open or flexible?
In terms of relinquishing disciplinary expertise, it can go two ways, I think. You really can dig in and say, no, this is my way and this is how I interpret it. But that's not going to take you very far at all. And I think ultimately the report really, really benefited from that interdisciplinarity. Where I could sit was to actually take or look at how that the legal perspective had been presented in addition to the environmental and social, and say, well, this is how important it is in a broader picture, which is that sort of broad brushstrokes things which a sort of governance approach can provide. So it was always a means of complementing the work from the other disciplines, I think, and that's really powerful. I mean, personally, the area that I work in is written by lawyers because we are talking about international agreements or domestic legislation, and this means that you have to have a legal perspective to be able to decode what is possible and what is impossible according to the law. So, but from a political perspective, it's like, well, let's take that further and let's look at who's pushing which legal perspective and why.
Picking up on what Susan's saying about your sort of leadership role in this process, Madeline, but also coming back to something you said before about the project being a multidisciplinary fest. I mean, I can imagine a fest being an exciting thing to lead, but also perhaps a sort of challenging and even chaotic thing to lead. So can you talk a little bit about that, about how you address everything from sort of, I don't know, organizing and delegating tasks to addressing maybe things like knowledge gaps, as somebody who, to some extent, is in charge of a project like this?
Yes, it's very kind. I don't think that it was just me in charge of this project. I think it was really collective, and I think that's, first of all, the first ingredient that's important. So Good leadership isn't about having one person spearheading a multidisciplinary project. And in fact, if you do that, there will be knowledge gaps and there will be communication gaps right away. And when you have a big, complex team, which we did, we had not just academics, we had colleagues of ours from the Climate Council, from Greenpeace, different species of perspectives, which was wonderful, and we encouraged that. So to me, this wasn't a project in which there was one leader. It was a collaborative collective that was movable. So when in terms of the day-to-day in managing and trying to collectivize around this, I think firstly it's really important that you have a feedback loop constantly with these big projects. It's so important that you exchange numbers, that you touch base, that you get to know each other on a bit of a personal level, so you feel confident in approaching one another candidly and having that constant communication. Second important thing is to stick to deadlines. I know that sounds simple, but for academics in particular, that can be hard for us because usually we're expected to, okay, you put it in a journal article and there's a call once a year or once a season, and we kind of work to that. But when you have a time-sensitive, public-facing, complex environmental issue, as Narrabri was, we didn't have that luxury. So we set very clear timetables right up front, and everybody stuck to those, which was wonderful. So I think we were quite lucky in the sense that we did all the groundwork up front in terms of getting that mutual trust and understanding. And I think that's because we saw the bigger picture of how important this was, and that there is a huge gap in the sense that in the Narrabri debate, there wasn't many expert multidisciplinary voices being put to the fore. And I think that's what our submission brought and why it had such impact.
For now, I thought I might just turn to you, Susan, and ask you a little bit, granting, I should say, that I feel like I'm in the presence of collaborators who really enjoy working together and who have very successfully worked together. I take it for granted at the same time that there are challenges, that there are complexities, right? You've talked a bit about risk, Madeline. Earlier on, Susan, you talked a little bit about sort of institutional hurdles to collaborative work. So Susan, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what challenges, based on this work that you've done together or other work you may have done?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of components to it. And I was lucky, I actually had training way back when I first started as an academic as to what you should look for in a collaboration. And that sort of builds you up to know what some of the pitfalls could be. So what sort of collaboration do you want? What are your expectations? How are you going to deal with when things go wrong? Do you identify attribution? All of these things which can become difficult if you don't deal with them from the get-go. So that's just the nature of collaboration in general. Interdisciplinary wise, I don't think those things are only heightened. If it had been an academic collaboration interdisciplinary wise, then you need to have those conversations about what it means to you for all of those things, sort of deadlines, attribution, which types of journals, because there still aren't that many interdisciplinary journals around, and we do face the structural impediments of you should publish in your own discipline and you need to build your track record, and that's how you win your grants and that's how you get promoted. So those things all have to be negotiated, and I've certainly had a number of conversations with people that have jumped into interdisciplinary collaborations without having those discussions, which means when it comes to where are we going to publish, whose name goes first, what does it mean in your discipline if your name doesn't come first? I mean, I'm lucky in my discipline, it doesn't really matter. But for other disciplines, it does, specifically in the sciences.
You know, institutionally, and this is not just academics, by the way, this is in corporations, policymakers, what have you. Usually you have, quite a hierarchy, and you must report to Professor X, CEO Y, and they have the version, you submit all of your points to them, etc., etc. But this was so organic. There was peer-to-peer mentoring going on. There were people of all different levels, who were leading, which was beautiful. So it was no longer this traditional collaboration, which I really enjoyed. And it was great because in our disciplines, we did publish with scientists too, but I said quite early on, the way we'll attribute is alphabetically, and that's my rule.
Thanks very much. I feel like I could very happily sit here and continue talking about this forever. But this has been an incredibly rich discussion. Thanks for being so generous with your reflections and your thoughts. Thanks very much, Susan, and thank you, Madeline.
Thanks.
Thank you, Killian.
Pleasure. And thanks very much for watching. Take care.